A man stood frozen in the middle of a forest clearing, his heart pounding like a jackhammer in his chest. Just 20 feet away, a massive black bear, easily 400 pounds of pure muscle and fury, is staring directly at him. Her dark eyes are locked onto his, and between them lies her wounded cub, blood matting its fur, whimpering in pain. This isn't a movie. This isn't a nature documentary. This is real life, and what happens next will leave you speechless. But before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications to catch more heartwarming stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what unfolds here. The man's name is Jake Sullivan, a 34-year-old forest ranger from Montana, and the decision he's about to make will change everything. Because what the mother bear does next, nobody, and I mean nobody, could have predicted it. Let me take you back to where this all began, 3 weeks before that heart-stopping moment in the clearing. Jake Sullivan had been a forest ranger for 12 years, patrolling the vast wilderness of Glacier National Park. He'd seen it all, or so he thought. Mountain lions stalking through moonlit meadows, elk herds thundering across valleys, and yes, plenty of bears. Black bears, grizzlies, mother bears with cubs. He knew their patterns, their territories, their behaviors like the back of his weathered hands. But Jake had a problem. Well, not Jake exactly. The forest had a problem, and Jake was the one trying to solve it. For months, illegal poachers had been setting traps throughout the protected wilderness. Steel jaw traps, snares, brutal devices that didn't discriminate between the animals they were meant to catch and innocent wildlife just trying to survive. Jake had been finding these traps for weeks, dismantling them one by one, but the poachers were always one step ahead. Every morning, Jake would start his patrol at dawn, his truck loaded with bolt cutters, first aid supplies, and a heavy heart, because he knew that somewhere out there, an animal might be suffering, might be dying, and time was always running out. The Forest Service had been receiving reports from hikers about injured animals, strange sounds echoing through the valleys at night, cries of pain that made even the most experienced outdoorsman's blood run cold. Jake had investigated every single report, but he was always too late. By the time he arrived, the animals were either gone or beyond help. This particular morning started like any other. October air crisp enough to see your breath, leaves painting the mountainside in brilliant oranges and golds. Jake filled his thermos with black coffee, kissed his wife Sarah goodbye, and headed out into the wilderness he'd sworn to protect. He had no idea that this day would test every skill he'd ever learned, every instinct he'd ever trusted, and every ounce of courage he thought he possessed. The distress call came in at 9:47 a.m. "Jake, we've got a hiker about 3 miles north of Avalanche Creek," crackled the radio. "Says he's hearing something that sounds like, well, like an animal in serious trouble." Jake's jaw tightened. He knew that area. Dense forest, rocky terrain, and unfortunately, exactly the kind of place where poachers like to set their traps. "I'm on my way," Jake responded, already turning his truck toward the mountain trail. The drive took 20 minutes on winding forest roads that would challenge even the most experienced drivers. Jake's truck bounced over rocks and roots, the suspension groaning under the weight of his equipment. But his mind wasn't on the rough ride. It was on what he might find when he got there. As he hiked deeper into the forest, following the coordinates the hiker had provided, he could hear it. Faint at first, but growing stronger with every step. A sound that made his stomach drop. Crying. Not human crying, animal crying. High-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound that cuts straight through your soul and demands action. Jake picked up his pace, his boots crunching through fallen leaves, branches catching at his ranger uniform. The sound was getting louder, more desperate. Whatever was out there was running out of time. And then he saw it. In a small clearing, barely visible through the underbrush, was a steel jaw trap. The kind that should have been banned everywhere, not just in national parks. The kind that could snap a man's leg in two without hesitation. But it wasn't a man's leg caught in those merciless steel jaws. It was a bear cub. Jake's heart nearly stopped. The cub couldn't have been more than 4 months old, its dark fur matted with blood, its left hind leg caught in the trap's vicious grip. The little animal was exhausted from struggling, its cries growing weaker by the minute. Jake dropped his pack and pulled out his bolt cutters. The trap was old, but well maintained. Whoever had set it knew what they were doing. This wasn't some amateur operation. These were professional poachers, and they'd chosen their spot well. Remote, hidden, far from any hiking trails. The cub looked up at Jake with dark, pain-filled eyes. In that moment, something passed between them. Trust? Desperation? A plea for help that transcended species? Jake didn't know. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Jake had freed animals from traps before, but never a bear cub, and definitely never alone in the middle of the wilderness with a mother bear potentially nearby. His hands were steady as he examined the trap mechanism, but his mind was racing. These steel jaw traps were designed to hold their victims until the poachers returned. The spring mechanism was incredibly strong. It would take significant force to pry those jaws apart. "Easy there, little one," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm going to get you out of this." The cub had stopped struggling, either from exhaustion or because it somehow sensed that this human was different. Its breathing was rapid and shallow, classic signs of shock setting in. Jake positioned his bolt cutters on the trap's spring mechanism. This was going to be the tricky part. He needed to disable the trap without causing additional injury to the cub's already damaged leg. As he worked, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every few seconds he'd pause and scan the tree line. The forest seemed too quiet, as if it were holding its breath.
The first cut through the spring mechanism sent a sharp crack echoing through the trees. Jake froze, listening for any response. Nothing. He continued working, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. The second cut was harder. The metal was thicker here, designed to withstand an animal's desperate attempts to escape. That's when he heard it. A low rumble from somewhere behind him. Not thunder. Something much more immediate and terrifying. A bear's warning growl. Jake's blood turned to ice. Very slowly, he turned around. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood the cub's mother. She was massive, easily 400 pounds, her dark fur rippling over powerful muscles. Her lips were pulled back, revealing teeth that could crush bones without effort, and she was staring directly at Jake. In that moment, every piece of training Jake had ever received seemed to evaporate. You're supposed to make yourself look big. You're supposed to back away slowly. You're supposed to avoid eye contact. But Jake couldn't move, couldn't look away, because in the mother bear's eyes, he saw something that stopped him cold. It wasn't just aggression. It wasn't just the protective fury of a mother defending her young. It was intelligence, recognition. She knew exactly what Jake was doing. The question was, did she see him as a threat to her cub, or as its only hope for survival? Time seemed to stretch like taffy in that clearing. Jake could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool air. The mother bear hadn't moved, but her dark eyes never left his face. The cub whimpered again, and something extraordinary happened. The mother bear's growl softened. She took a step forward, not aggressive, not charging, but cautious, deliberate. Jake's training screamed at him to run. Every instinct built into human DNA over thousands of years told him to get away from this apex predator. But something deeper, something beyond instinct, kept him frozen in place. The bear took another step forward, then another. Jake could smell her now, that wild, musky scent of an animal that belonged entirely to the wilderness, could see the scars on her muzzle, the careful way she placed each massive paw. And then she did something that defied everything Jake thought he knew about wild animals. She sat down. 20 feet away from Jake, 20 feet away from her trapped cub, this 400-pound black bear lowered herself to a sitting position and simply waited. Jake's mind reeled. In 12 years as a ranger, he'd never seen anything like this. Bears don't sit patiently while humans handle their cubs. They charge, they attack, they drive the threat away by any means necessary. Unless she understood that Jake wasn't a threat, unless she recognized that he was trying to help. The cub cried out again, weaker this time. Jake could see its strength fading. If he didn't act soon, it would be too late. Very slowly, Jake spoke to the mother bear. "I'm going to help your baby," he said quietly. "I know you can't understand me, but I need you to trust me." The bear's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. She tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Jake turned back to the trap, his hands remarkably steady now. He positioned the bolt cutters again, found his grip, and squeezed with everything he had. The metal groaned in protest, but it held. Behind him, Jake heard the bear shift her weight. He didn't turn around, couldn't afford to lose focus now. The cub's life hung in the balance. He repositioned the cutters, found a better angle, and tried again. This time, he felt the metal begin to give way. "Come on," Jake muttered through his gritted teeth. "Come on!" A sharp crack echoed through the clearing as the spring mechanism finally snapped. The trap's jaws loosened their grip on the cub's leg. But Jake wasn't done yet. Now came the most dangerous part, actually removing the cub from the trap without causing further injury. He glanced back at the mother bear. She had risen to her feet but hadn't moved closer. Her body language had changed, though. Where before she seemed coiled with tension, now she appeared almost expectant, as if she was waiting to see what Jake would do next. Jake had trained for wildlife emergencies, but nothing had prepared him for this. Gently, carefully, he began working the trap's jaws apart while supporting the cub's injured leg. The little bear was barely conscious now, its breathing shallow and rapid. Blood matted its fur, and Jake could see that the trap had done significant damage. This cub needed medical attention, and fast. As Jake worked, something incredible happened. The mother bear began to move closer. Not charging, not threatening, just approaching. Jake's pulse spiked, but he forced himself to stay focused on the cub. One wrong move could sever an artery or break bones that might still be intact. The mother bear was 10 feet away now, then 8, then 5. Jake could feel her presence like a physical weight, could hear her breathing deep and steady, could sense her watching his every movement with those intelligent dark eyes. And then, just as Jake managed to free the cub's leg from the trap, the mother bear did something that would haunt Jake's dreams for the rest of his life, but not in the way you'd expect. She lay down beside him. This massive predator, this force of nature, lowered herself to the ground just 3 feet away from Jake and placed her enormous head on its paws, watching, waiting. The cub, finally free from the trap, tried to crawl toward its mother, but collapsed after just a few inches. Its injured leg wouldn't support its weight. Jake looked at the wound. It was bad. Lacerated muscle, possible fracture, definitely needed surgery. Without immediate help, the cub might not survive the journey back to its den, let alone the healing process. Jake pulled his emergency medical kit from his pack. He had bandages, antiseptic, even some basic painkillers that worked on wildlife. But treating a wild animal, especially with its mother watching every move? Jake looked into the mother bear's eyes again, and what he saw there made his decision for him. Not aggression, not fear. Hope. Okay, Mama, I'm gonna help your baby, but I need you to stay calm. The bear's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but she didn't move. Jake began cleaning the cub's wound, working as gently as possible. The little bear whimpered with each touch, but didn't try to bite or claw. It was as if it understood that this pain was different, that it was helping, not hurting. The mother bear watched every movement, occasionally making soft chuffing sounds that Jake had never heard from a wild bear before, almost like she was talking to her cub, reassuring it. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, Jake finished bandaging the cub's leg. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold until they could get proper veterinary care. But that raised the biggest question of all. What happened next? Jake sat back on his heels, his medical kit scattered around him, and looked at the bandaged cub. It was alive, stable for the moment, but clearly in no condition to return to the wild immediately. The right thing to do, the thing his training demanded, was to call for a wildlife rescue team. They would take the cub to a rehabilitation center, treat its injuries properly, and eventually release it back into the wild. But that process could take months, and it would mean separating the cub from its mother during a critical bonding period. Jake looked at the mother bear, still lying calmly beside him. She had moved closer while he worked, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her massive paw. "What do you want me to do?" he asked her quietly. "I can take your baby to get help, but—" The bear lifted her head and looked directly into Jake's eyes. And in that moment, something passed between them. An understanding that transcended species, transcended everything Jake thought he knew about the natural world. The mother bear slowly got to her feet. Jake tensed, ready to react if she became aggressive. But instead of threatening him, she did something extraordinary. She gently picked up her cub in her mouth, the way mother cats carry kittens, and placed it directly in front of Jake.
Then she backed away 3 steps and sat down again. Jake stared in disbelief. You want me to take him?" The bear made that soft chuffing sound again, waiting. Jake's radio crackled to life, making him jump. "Jake, what's your status? You've been quiet for over an hour." He grabbed the radio with shaking hands. "Base, this is Jake. I'm going to need a veterinary team at my location. And you're not going to believe this, but I think I have a volunteer." "Say again, Jake?" Jake looked at the mother bear, who was watching him intently. "I've got an injured cub that needs immediate medical attention, and its mother just handed it to me." Silence on the radio. Then, "Jake, did you hit your head out there?" Before Jake could answer, the mother bear did something that made his heart stop. She stood up, walked over to him, and gently nuzzled his shoulder with her massive head. A 400-pound wild black bear had just given him what could only be described as a hug. "Base," Jake said, his voice barely steady,
I'm going to need that vet team ASAP, and maybe someone from the Wildlife Behavior Department, because I think we're witnessing something that's never been documented before. What happened next defied everything in every wildlife manual ever written. The mother bear followed Jake and her cub all the way back to his truck. Not stalking, not hunting, following, like a concerned parent accompanying their child to the hospital. Jake carried the cub carefully, stopping every few minutes to check its breathing and pulse. Each time he stopped, the mother bear would catch up and inspect her baby, sniffing gently and making those soft chuffing sounds. When they reached Jake's truck, he faced a dilemma. How do you transport an injured bear cub with its protective mother watching your every move? The answer, it turned out, was simple. The mother bear approached the truck, sniffed it thoroughly, then sat down beside the passenger door and waited. Jake carefully placed the cub on a blanket in the passenger seat, making sure its injured leg was supported. The cub's breathing was stronger now, though it was still clearly in pain. As Jake closed the passenger door, the mother bear stood up and walked to his window. She pressed her nose against the glass and looked directly at him. "I'll take good care of your baby," Jake promised her. "I'll bring him back to you." The bear stepped back, and Jake started his truck. As he pulled away, he watched in his rearview mirror as the massive bear followed them down the forest road for nearly a mile before finally stopping at the park boundary. Even then, she sat and watched until Jake's truck disappeared around a bend. The veterinary team was waiting at the ranger station when Jake arrived. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the park's wildlife veterinarian, took one look at Jake's makeshift bandaging and raised her eyebrows. "Nice work. You probably saved this little one's life. How did you manage to treat him without sedation?" Jake looked down at the cub, now resting peacefully in its carrier. "He had a very good nurse," he said quietly. 2 weeks later, Jake found himself back in that same forest clearing, but this time he wasn't alone. The veterinary team had done an incredible job. The cub's leg had healed beautifully, and he was strong enough to return to the wild. But the real question was whether his mother would still be there. Jake didn't have to wonder for long. As soon as he stepped into the clearing carrying the transport cage, a familiar dark shape emerged from the tree line. The mother bear approached cautiously at first, but as soon as she caught her cub's scent, she broke into a run. Jake quickly opened the cage door and stepped back. What followed was a reunion that brought tears to the eyes of every person present. The mother bear wrapped her massive arms around her cub, nuzzling and sniffing and making those soft sounds Jake remembered so well. But then she did something even more extraordinary. She left her cub playing nearby and walked directly up to Jake. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the wild bear and the human ranger simply looked at each other. Then, gently, the bear pressed her forehead against Jake's chest. "Thank you," Jake whispered. As if she understood, the mother bear stepped back, collected her cub, and disappeared into the forest. But not before looking back one last time. A look that Jake would carry with him for the rest of his life. 6 months later, Jake still patrols those same forests. The poachers were eventually caught and prosecuted, their traps removed and destroyed. But Jake's life was changed forever by what happened in that clearing. Because he learned something that day that no textbook could have taught him. Sometimes, in our darkest moments, when we're trapped and hurting and scared, help comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the very act of helping others, even when it's dangerous, even when it's difficult, even when we're scared, creates bonds that transcend every barrier we thought existed. That mother bear trusted Jake with the most precious thing in her world, and in doing so, she reminded him why he became a ranger in the first place.
not just to protect the wilderness, but to be part of something bigger than himself. The forest is full of stories like this, stories of courage, compassion, and connection that remind us what's truly important in this world. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you care about. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales from the wild. And remember, in a world that can sometimes feel dark and divided, there are still moments of pure light that remind us we're all connected. Sometimes that connection happens between humans, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, it happens between species, reminding us that compassion, love, and trust are the universal languages that bind all living things together. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.